Greetings everyone, my name is Greg. In this video I am going to do a pre-live show warm-up to give you guys a taste of pretty much where I'm going with the live show. Hopefully I'll have Bob with me on this one. He had said he may be able to take part in this show. All of this came about because I had gotten this comment on my one video for New Atheists. And this person had said, when you argue exactly like a fundamentalist, is it any wonder that people don't want to talk with you? Which kind of has me scratching my head. And then they say, quoting the Bible is easy, understanding it is hard. No. That is bullshit. Understanding the Bible is not hard, because you simply have to be able to understand, to use the term context, and what words mean, which is why I do what I do with showing you what words mean in the Hebrew or Greek language. It is to help you, the listener, understand what is being said. Because when you're reading something, it doesn't matter what it is. If you're reading, well, their next comment had said, if you use literal Bible quotes as an argument, then you argue exactly like a fundamentalist. That is false. Fundamentalists do not, they will say they literally go by the Bible, but they literally don't. Because you don't have any fundamentalist that would say, yeah, David didn't kill Goliath with a slingshot. He just knocked him down with that. Then he stood on the man's chest and cut his head off with a sword, and then proceeded to carry the head around with him. Even though that is exactly what is written. It's these type of things. There's also, you don't hear, or you hear the fundamentalist Christians say Eve ate an apple, even though the word apple does not appear anywhere in Genesis. The word apple doesn't appear until Deuteronomy. What they're doing is, and they'll also try claiming that the serpent in Genesis is Satan. That is not the case. I've talked to Mark Powers about this, among other things. And like another good example, and this is one that goes back to the conversations I've had with Mark, where I had said Christians say that the fallen angels are mentioned in Genesis. And he was where? Basically chapter and verse. I told him where they try and get this in Genesis 6. He read over it and he was, I don't see anything about fallen angels. And what he was getting at, he wanted to know exactly where it was written. And then he was looking at it like you would look at any text in a story. And being, that's not what it says. That's not what's there. That's not being a fundamentalist. That's being factual. Is that what's written in the book or not? Because based on this idea that that basically everything's an interpretation, I had said to this person, what you're saying is akin to someone looking at a cop and saying, like someone that has been speeding, that is pulled over by a cop, and the cop says, do you know how fast you were going? And they go, no. And the cop tells them the speed, and they're like, well, that's your interpretation. My interpretation is I was doing the speed limit. What? A cop would, they'd probably laugh at you initially and be, you can't be serious. Or in a student in a college, and the professor hands their test back and gives them, and they have an F. And they look at the professor, and asked them why they got these questions wrong, and they were because of the wrong answer. Well, that's your interpretation. My interpretation is those answers are right. So based on my interpretation, I gave the right answer, so I should get 100%. That is stupid. To try and act like everything is your interpretation that's retarded. But they tried, let me go back to their second one again, because they tried saying, would you interpret a science textbook? Would you read and interpret a science textbook? No, I wouldn't. I would read it, but I wouldn't interpret it. Because, one, I don't know any language other than English, so there's nothing, and that would even be translate. But as far as interpret, no. I would go by what is in the textbook. What does it say? What is the information being conveyed? Or a fantasy novel. I've read novels by Stephen King. I personally prefer audiobooks, but it's a bit nitpicky. But the aspect of when I'm either listening to a book or reading a book, I'm not going by what I want to make up. I'm going by what's actually there. Either what's actually the words on the page or what's actually read in the audio version. When you're watching this video or listening to this, are you having to interpret what I'm saying, or are you just listening to it? And the message that I'm giving is explained in what I'm saying. There's no interpretation needed. When you watch a television show, you're not having to interpret anything. You're just watching a television show. And you're taking in what is the images that are being conveyed and the dialogue that is being expressed. This idea that everything is open to each person's interpretation, if that would be accurate, we would not be able to have any conversation. There would not be able to be any comedy, because it would all be interpretation. That's horse shit. This undermines everything that is basically the fabric of society. We can't communicate with animals because they can't understand our language. Not really, at least we can, and we can't understand theirs. There are some dogs that appear to understand what we're saying, but there's also Penn and Teller Penn Jillette made a point with this that I thought was rather amusing, where they had, I think it was a small dog or whatnot on their show Bullshit, and he was petting it and going, I hate you, I want to strangle you, and then, I love you, cat! And when he yelled, it jumped back. But when he was petting it and talking soft, it did not react to the words he was saying. It wasn't reacting to what he was saying, but the action he was doing. And that is basically what it seems dogs and so forth understand. They understand our inflection, that when our voice goes up or whatnot, but they don't really understand what we're saying. And that would be an aspect of an animal would have to interpret what you're doing. Or when you're interacting with an animal, you have to interpret what its actions mean. Because you don't know. And interpretations can, and in a lot of cases are, flat out wrong. But another example I had given with the fantasy novel aspect was, and it's a prime example, the aspect of, you guys probably remember Stephen King's movie, The Shining, the original movie that was made by Stanley Kubrick. Did you know Stephen King hated that? Because he had said that was not what he wrote. That was not the story he was telling. Stanley Kubrick had taken some liberties with the story of The Shining. Because the story Stephen King was trying to tell was that of an alcoholic and someone that was battling alcoholism. And that the story was centered around this guy's alcoholism. It wasn't about cabin fever, as The Shining became, and somebody losing their mind. The thing is, when you have someone making a movie, all movies are, to use the term, interpreted to a point. The screenplay is another person's version of the story. Now, there are cases of, like, another movie that was made, another one that was made from, taken to movie from books that I felt, I liked the books far better than the movie, was The Green Mile. And because there were things that were in the books and so forth that simply weren't in The Green Mile, the movie. And I just didn't care for the movie as much as I did the books. But the movie was a different interpretation of the books, those novellas that Stephen King wrote. The overall story was the same, but there were subtle differences between the books and the movie. And some of that has to happen because of time. Because with the mini books, they were, I think it was 6 parts. And you had a movie that was only about 2 hours long, or a little bit over that. So they had to condense, story-wise, what was in, pretty much to read it even would be hours of information and hours of story into this 2 to 2.5 hour movie. And that is where you do lose things in interpretation, because the interpreting it, they're doing it to condense for time. But when Christians interpret the New Testament and interpret the Bible, they are not going by what is there. A lot of times what I hear from Christians is their interpretation is nothing like what is actually in the text. It is not being a fundamentalist to say you're not going by what's on the page. You're making up your own version, but you're trying to say that you are literally going by what the Bible says. No, you're not. You're not literally doing anything other than making up your own version. That's literally what you are doing. You could say you are figuratively going by what is in the text, but you are not literally going by what is there unless you are reading it what is there. Like when Christians say the Passover was about salvation. No, that's not what's written. They don't say Passover was about the God killing firstborn babies. They don't say that because that doesn't fit their narrative. Jews will even say it wasn't about the killing of the babies, it was about the Jews getting out of Egypt. They'll try to spin it to being away from the fact that this God had one plague more. They don't even want to look at what was this God's one more plague. So in that, they're, in a sense, putting a spin on it to make it look not as bad. But then there is this stupid shit. They tried doing this. This is what Oxford says. And if you notice, at number 2, and that's what they say they're referring to, is that To interpret is to consider to be the meaning of. And they give an example, his silence as a refusal. The thing is, they're trying to say that that is what they mean by interpreting. When you are doing that, what you are doing, let me just point this out. If you are interpreting someone's silence as a refusal, then what you are doing is they aren't giving you anything in words. It's like you would have to interpret someone like, I don't know if you have seen, he's a bit of a comedian, he's more of a mime. His name, he was on America's Got Talent. The name he goes by is Tape Face. It is somebody that literally has a piece of tape over his mouth. Does not talk. His eyes move, but he does not talk. There you have to interpret, because you're not given anything in words. You are having to interpret what you're seeing. And the thing is, the aspect of that, in some ways you're not interpreting because you're just going by what is he doing. In other ways you do, like when the eyes move and so forth, we do take and have the subtle, the nonverbal hints that are given. But these are cues that we have very similar to someone's body language. But that is not the same as they had said later on, that basically everything that I say, they have to interpret. You're not reading it, you're doing this, I have to interpret everything. Then basically a conversation with such a person is impossible. There is no way to have a conversation with someone that they're not really going to go by what you're saying. They're going to be interpreting it in whatever way. Because under that type of mindset, then how do I know that you're not interpreting everything I've said in this to being, oh, he's just reading the, 50 Shades of Grey book. That's all he's saying is 50 Shades of Grey. Or talking some sexual whatnot, even though I hadn't mentioned anything of the kind. You could be, it's my interpretation. It's bullshit. If you're not going by what I am actually saying, you're not listening to me. You're not interpreting shit. You're making it up. You're making it up to fit your agenda, which that is fundamentalist. When you twist what someone is saying or what is written somewhere to fit your narrative, that's a fundamentalist. That is someone that is so closed-minded that they're only interested in promoting their own agenda. But I'm going to cut this one short. This is the direction, this is where the live show is going to go. And I welcome the input on that, as well as, like always, feel free to leave your thoughts and comments in the comment section. Later, people.